Moral argument for God's existence goes basically like this. Premise one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. If there isn't a God as your absolute standard, then everything becomes socio-culturally relative. Moral values are just ingrained patterns of behavior that have evolved through biological and social evolution. So if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise two, objective moral values and duties do exist. Some things are really wrong. Rape, torture of a little child, molestation, hatred, cruelty are really wrong. Similarly, love, generosity, self-sacrifice are really good. And from these two premises, it follows, number three, that therefore God exists. If objective moral values and duties cannot exist without God, and objective moral values and duties do exist, as is evident in our moral experience, then it follows necessarily that God exists.
Yeah. So what would you say very quickly to somebody who says, and Hitchens says this, we'll talk about him in a second. He's saying, look, I don't need the idea of God to make me good. Why do you insist that I've got to believe in God to be good?
Okay, this is a very widespread confusion that you will encounter every time you share this argument. The argument is not that belief in God is necessary for morality. The argument is that God is necessary for morality. The existence of objective moral values and duties doesn't depend upon your belief in them. They exist independently if they exist. The argument is that God is necessary as a foundation for objective moral values and duties. But if God exists, and there are objective moral values and duties, then they exist independently of whether you believe in them or not. In particular, they exist for the atheist, because they don't depend on whether the atheist believes in God or not. These are objective realities. So the argument is not that atheists are bad people, or that they can't live good and decent lives, or that in order to live a good life you have to believe in God. That's not the argument. The argument is that in order for objective, mind-independent moral values and duties to exist, you have to have a foundation in God.
And isn't that where the discussion goes? If you reject the idea of God, and we therefore reject, even though I say there are some, I don't need God to be moral, but the question then becomes, well, what is moral? And I might have a list that doesn't match up with yours. If we reject this foundation for morality, and the foundation is just what I in my gut think is right, because there are those that would say that, for instance, sexual morality is part of what you, because you have a foundation of theology and God, believe. Yeah. But I'm telling you, that's repressive, it's puritanical, and it's unnecessary. And so I still have a morality. My morality is different than yours because my base is different.
Well, see, that person is affirming the first premise, that if God does not exist, then objective moral values don't exist. It's person relative. You have your code, I have my code. What he's really denying is the second premise, that objective moral values exist. He says they're person relative or person dependent. But notice when he says, that's repressive, that's intolerant, that's wrong, he's affirming the objectivity of those moral values, tolerance, open-mindedness, fair play. So that it's very, very difficult to deny the objectivity of moral values and duties, because those who typically do so affirm the moral values of tolerance, open-mindedness, and so forth.